Hello and welcome to our panel on the future of the healthcare and life sciences startup ecosystem. I'm thrilled to have two impressive guests on this panel, Nick Crocker, General Partner at Blackbird Ventures, and Tim Doyle, Founder and CEO of Eucalyptus. Tim is a healthcare life sciences founder, CEO, and Nick is his VC partner. So we are going to get this awesome founder VC dynamic here because Nick led the seed and seed extension rounds of Eucalyptus on behalf of Blackbird. So I'm super excited. My name is Kelsey Dory. I'm a US founder who moved to Sydney 2 years ago. I've worked mostly in startups since uni with 2 startups that are now unicorns, 2 who have IPO'd, 1 acquisition, and over $1 billion in capital raised. I started and ran my own startup in LA for 5 years, and now I'm part of the AWS startup team, where I get to help fellow founders on their journey as not only my passion, but also my day job. So we have a large, amazing team of startup veterans and experts at AWS who are ready to help with all of your startup needs. So reach out anytime. Nick and Tim, thank you guys so much for joining us today. I'm going to ask each of you to share a bit more about yourselves, but first, I'm going to do a bit of an intro on you, just in case you're a little too humble. So Tim came from Koala, was the former head of marketing, strategy, and growth. 3 years ago, he founded Eucalyptus, and he's raised over $100 million from top VCs in Australia and the US, including Blackbird, Airtree, Bond in the US, and even Woolworths venture capital arm. Nick is a VC partner at Blackbird and a former founder with 2 successful exits, one of which was in healthcare life sciences, so he's the perfect VC to join us today. He also was the CEO of START3 prior to that and a journalist who's been published in Wired, Fast Company, and the Harvard Business Review. He's now a generalist VC, but today we're going to focus on healthcare life sciences startups and his experience and thoughts in that sector. So Tim, will you start and tell us a bit about Eucalyptus and the brands in the portfolio?
Yeah, for sure. So Eucalyptus is like a telehealth platform where there's a core underlying infrastructure that does consults, prescribing, connects you to doctors and to pharmacies and to health practitioners, a whole variety of those. And then on top of that, we have 5 brands. And so basically the way to think of the brands is like they're demographic focused clinics for different care areas within like the broader health ecosystem. So we have Pilot, which is a men's health brand focusing on like discretion, convenience, and things like that. Kin, which does fertility. Juniper, which does weight and menopause. And then Normal, which does sexual wellness, and Software, which is a skincare brand. So it's been a bit of a crazy 3 years launching all of those.
I can only imagine.
Yeah, it's been good.
Awesome. And Nick, can you tell us a bit about Blackbird?
Sure. So we are coming up on 10 years of age, and we manage almost $10 billion of money on behalf of our investors. We're lucky to be partners with founders like Tim and companies like Canva, Safety Culture, Culture Amp. And our mission in life is to find the wildest of hearts right at the beginning of their journey.
Amazing. Awesome. So let's dive in on the healthcare life sciences sector. So in ANZ, the healthcare life sciences startups grew 1,354% in terms of funding year over year, from 17 million in the third quarter of 2020 to 253 million in the third quarter of 2021. Deal count tripled from 2020 to 2021, and Eucalyptus contributed to that with your 30 million Series B in 2021, only to be surpassed by your 60 million Series C in 2022. So congratulations, Tim and the Euc team. That's amazing. So let's start at the beginning for you. Why did you decide to start a company in the healthcare life sciences sector specifically?
I mean, like we weren't actually thinking too much about the healthcare sector originally. Like what we were seeing coming out of Koala, and my co-founder, one of my co-founders is also from Koala, is when you remove friction in an otherwise like high friction experience, in this case like furniture shopping, put it online and make it simple for people tend to like flock to it. And so what we were thinking is like that insight could be done across a whole lot of other sectors, and we picked healthcare because we felt it was a space where digitization had been really slow. I think that's like a known thing. And we felt that we could build technology to make the relationship between a doctor and a patient much simpler and much more convenient. And that was like the original insight to drive what we did. And then obviously like we launched the first brand, which was Pilot. And then I think COVID hit just as we were launching the second brand, which is Kin, which is like a huge driver of acceleration. And I think that's why you saw the funding bump, because we saw probably like 10 years of growth in the sector happen compressed into 18 months, which is awesome for us, but it means like there's some really interesting questions about what happens next for us and also for the sector as a whole.
Yeah, lots of behavior change in terms of customers and also just massive changes for this somewhat outdated industry, right? That's always
it's been incredible. I think like just the number of like the first version of what we're seeing, like people shift from a in-person consult model to like a phone or a video consult model. And like I think like that's analogous to the early days of e-commerce where you saw just like retailers go online, but given where e-commerce is now with like the many, many different ways you can interact and buy things, I'm excited to think about like what the second and third generation of like healthcare interactions is going to be off the back of that.
Amazing. So Nick, he clearly has an amazing concept and fast growth, but what was it specifically, now that you're a generalist VC, that drew you to Eucalyptus and Tim?
So Tim and I met before he joined Koala, and I remember the first time that we went out for lunch and we talked about just the widest range of things, including the unit economics of French restaurants. And I came out of that lunch and I called Nikki Shavac, who's the co-founder of Blackbird, and I said, I've just met someone who is unlike anyone else I've ever met, and you need to meet him straight away. And that sort of started the firm-wide relationship that we had with Tim. He helped a lot of our portfolio companies. We just built there's no company to fund at that stage, but it was a really strong firm-wide relationship with Tim and an admiration for the way that he thought. And when that happens, you hope that when they come one day and pitch a company that it's good enough for you to fund, because we were very excited to fund him. We just needed the idea to be interesting. So he came and pitched a suite of ideas, and that was really what it was. And yeah, I think from me saying, please come and pitch us, it was we were ready to fund quicker than he had the company set up.
Hours. Yeah, it was great.
No way.
So,
yeah. So from like, even from idea through, like, we workshopped the idea together, actually. Like, I kind of ran it through both Nick and Sam initially, and then from pitch to term sheet to company starting was like 72 hours. So
amazing.
Yeah, you can think of it as a 2-year diligence process that wasn't looking at financial models, was actually getting to know the way Tim thought and then the way that his co-founders thought as well.
Yeah. So you build, this is a perfect example of you build that relationship early with the founders you potentially want to back and the investors you potentially want to have. And you guys did that for 2 years. So when the idea came about, it all happened really quickly.
Yeah, I see a lot of actually like situations where people are trying to get ready to pitch for VCs. And I think like the way that both Blackbird and some of the other funds in the space think about it now is like establish early, even if you're not ready, and you can actually kind of build that relationship before you're fully finished in terms of what your idea actually is going to be pitch ready. And then that's actually a really great foundation, as opposed to like arriving with a fully completed business plan or whatever it might be.
Yep, and a bet on the people, and then the ideas comes after that.
Yeah, well, I was totally open to the business going anywhere. The thing that wasn't going to change was Tim and the team, and that was what drew us to the investment in the first place.
Were you extra excited as a former healthcare life sciences founder that he came up with a healthcare life sciences idea?
Yeah, it was the best feeling, because as you said, I'd done a healthcare company before. It wasn't that successful, but I knew in Tim's hands and the team's hands that this might be my chance to be a part of something that really worked. And
and I think that was like, that actually like was formative to the idea as well, where, you know, like there was a lot of times where we were debating whether or not how deep to go into this sector. And I think like the confidence that Nick and Blackbird had in that like it was possible was a huge driver of where we got to.
And so you've now raised a ton of money from a lot of different investors, US and ANZ. Why Blackbird and why Nick? It sounds like you built an amazing relationship, but why were they the right partners for this business and continue to be in additional rounds?
Yeah, I think like the 2-year build up to actually starting the company is probably the biggest thing, right? Where it's like you're workshopping ideas, you're getting to know people. I think like Nick said something very early on in knowing him, which was like you need to like these relationships are about optimizing for integrity, and I think like Blackbird has a track record there that is like unparalleled. And so when it came time to like we built the idea kind of like collaboratively, and then when you're trying to figure out who you want to be working with for the next 10 years, I think the fact that relationship is really strong was pretty crucial to how it worked.
And to Tim's point earlier about when to come pitch us, most people come with that polished pitch deck. But I think you came with a Google Doc of thoughts.
Yeah.
And then I was in there, and Samantha was in there, and James Tynan, who was the CEO of StartMate, was in there. We were all working on it collaboratively, and that's the best way to get the outcome versus this very cold, distant, perfect clinical pitch.
Yeah, because then you're getting assessed on something that hasn't been checked, right? Whereas this is the opportunity to like kind of workshop it at some level. Like as long as there's, I think like, I don't want to make it sound like it was like there was no idea there. Like there was some core insights about how a company may look in the future, and then it was kind of beaten into shape from 70% to 100% collaboratively, which is I think a really great way to do it.
Well, and you guys found people that you want to work with on both sides, and then had an idea, it sounds like, with a big vision and a big mission. And so that maybe the details weren't figured out, but you knew where you guys wanted to take Eucalyptus.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's actually one of the things that people get wrong sometimes about venture capital is it's not like they're not assessing like, is this business going to be successful or not, but rather like, is this business capable of being, you know, a multi-billion-dollar company? And that's actually much more important than whether or not it can, you know, successfully, profitably be a $20 million company, because that's a different type of funding that you need.
I think that's something really key that I didn't necessarily understand in my early days as a founder, and a lot of founders would benefit, is digging in and understanding the VC math. Yeah. What are the VCs looking for when they're investing? If you don't have a potential of being a multi-billion-dollar exit, if you can't even think and seem and dream that, the VC can't either. And then you're not a venture-backed business necessarily, I think.
Yeah, and it doesn't mean you're a good business either, right? Like, I think there's a lot of venture-backed speculative bets, which we may end up falling into the category of, who knows, that marked by their ambition, not by their likelihood of success. And so there are like some really great businesses that are really likely to succeed that won't get venture capital money, but it's not an assessment of how good they are.
Yep. And to the point of, your 10-year comment, it really is like a marriage in a sense, the founder and VC relationship. You're going to have highs, you're going to have lows. Who's going to stand by your side the whole time? Who's got that been there, done that experience? So I love to hear that you guys built this over a few years, the relationship before. So let's look at trends in the industry. Nick, what are you seeing in the healthcare life sciences industry? What are some trends that get you excited?
Yeah, so I think the one that Tim came with and he just touched on before is that transformational patient experience. Anyone who's touched healthcare in any way knows that it's not a place where patient experience is the first thing that gets thought of. Billing gets thought of, reimbursement gets thought of, insurance gets thought of, but all these things sort of happen without the patient coming first. And so Tim had that really core insight early on. So I love businesses that are coming with a transformational patient experience. And then I think the other trend that we're seeing is a lot of decision making in medicine happens where a doctor who's tired and stressed and seen heaps of patients has to make a visual or mental decision on something. And actually, artificial intelligence and machine learning you can offload a lot of the decision making. Not all, but a lot of the decision making. And so, whether it's a doctor looking at whether a skin cancer is going to get bad or not, like, I actually don't think a tired doctor is the optimal person to ask about that. But a repetitive machine learning algorithm probably is. So that's the other one that we see that I think is really exciting.
Awesome. And so what about you, Tim, for Eucalyptus specifically? What are some trends that you're interested in or wouldn't necessarily consider for you?
Well, I think there's this trend generally, which is the digital health technology stack is underbuilt. There is a lot of US-centric businesses that are doing it, but because of the weird nature of America and its healthcare system, you're getting built for a very specific regulatory environment. So outside of America, where the government plays a really key role and the patient plays a really key role in paying for things, that infrastructure is not yet fully sophisticated. And so whether that is on the billing side or on the patient tracking side or on the long-term care management or pharmaceutical management side, that technology infrastructure is open. And so I think it's exciting to see how that layers up over time and how I think fintech went through this phase where it was how do these technologies cross borders? And I think that's coming for healthcare, but I'm excited for it to be a non-US series of solutions because the world looks a lot more like each other than it looks like the US in the current kind of environment.
Well, and you mentioned regulation. So for both of you, what are some of the biggest challenges and some of the biggest benefits of being a startup in the heavily regulated, incumbent-heavy healthcare life sciences sector?
I think being a startup in the space, it's really important to, I think the trap that you fall into is if only this regulation would change, we would be the world's best business. And I think a lot of businesses die of starvation on the way, waiting for regulatory change, and are a bit naive about how long these things actually take. So I think finding a way to get paid in the short term on the journey to your bigger ambition, and sometimes having to make sacrifices to do that, is a really important strategic consideration for an early stage company in healthcare. Who is paying me and what are they paying me and how soon? Until you can get that answer, I think it's pretty hard to justify the long journey that is to go on the path to regulatory change. And I think a lot of people don't ever get there. So I think that's the one I would definitely look out for is make sure you have a path to commercialization that doesn't rely on change that seems far away because it just is always slower than you think.
Good point.
Yeah.
What about you, Nick?
Well, I think everyone needs healthcare. So if you're building software, often the question will be, well, who needs this? Is there a big enough market of people that need this? In healthcare, there's no question. So that's special. I think the other thing that's special and difficult is that you are held to such a higher bar on delivering a patient experience in healthcare. So if you deliver a bad software experience and it freezes, someone fixes it, you can come back tomorrow. That doesn't fly in healthcare. Healthcare has 100% uptime need, and so there's an extra burden or an extra responsibility on the business to deliver that, which most businesses don't have to deliver to that standard, or they can be less diligent on that.
It's literally can be life and death in this industry
100%.
versus a lot of other.
Yeah.
Like
startup
it is all the time. Like
Yeah.
just the amount, like I think it was a really like eye-opening experience for the first time that we went through like a serious medical event. And like the reality is it's like a normal side effect of the medication that is part of our broad portfolio. But to think that you've got someone's like care and they're in a hospital situation as your responsibility, like it's a real wake-up call that you're not moving, pixels around the screen.
And I'm sure, back to your point on customer service, right? The customer service is even more important there than it is at a SaaS business, let's say, or something, right? Where it actually depends life or death. But then on the flip side, probably the amount of purpose that it brings to you and everyone on your team
Yeah,
must
for sure.
be amazing.
Oh, we were talking just today about like what the recruiting landscape looks like at the moment, and like whether in like this so-called like war on talent, how do you continue to stand out? And I think like the reality is like the financial side of someone's career is only a small part of what motivates them. And so if you can position what you do in a way that like aligns people with your values and what you're trying to do in terms of impacting the world, like it's a great way to bring people on board and a great way to kind of deliver to people an experience that is like super valuable for them.
And even culture things, like on International Women's Day, one of your brands, Kind, announced the miscarriage leave policy and promoted that and encouraged other companies to do that. I thought that was amazing.
Yeah, it's actually like I had nothing to do with that, but it was like incredible to see. I think like the women that choose to spend their time working on the problems that we chose to solve is like such a incredible like endorsement for what we do, and then also to see the impact that they can have on societal issues is incredible.
Yeah. Okay, so if you guys were to start or fund a new healthcare life sciences startup tomorrow, what would it be?
I mean, I think like I'm lucky enough to get to do this. So like the way our portfolio works is we're always looking at the next opportunity. And I think like the biggest unanswered question in primary care is like what to do in mental health. I think like there is a lot of bit part solutions that aren't having a great impact. I think like whether that is face-to-face scaled psychology, or whether it's like dispensing a medication, or whether it's like behavioral therapy, like there's lots of promising areas, but not great outcomes. And I think the business to start, if you're starting something, is the attempt to be comprehensive in that space. And I think like that's where we're going to go next. So actually, maybe don't start that. But but if I were to be starting something hypothetically, then that was what I'd be working on.
Confidentially, nobody's watching this. Don't worry.
Yeah, of course.
What about you, Nick?
Yeah, so Tim stole my answer, would be something in mental health. And he also stole my answer is that I'd just ask Eucalyptus to do it. I wouldn't start it myself. So I actually joined Eucalyptus as a general manager of that brand.
Okay, Blackbird team, please don't watch this.
But what I'll talk about is what would I like to fund? A new trend that I love is there are a lot of doctors leaving the practice of medicine, especially doctors that are maybe 8 to 10 years into the journey, which is actually not that far into the journey, doing startups. And if you're a doctor who is unhappy, and I know that that's most of you, I want to fund you, because I think doctors have a lot of the resilience, tolerance, and intellectual horsepower that makes a great founder. So any doctors who are out there.
Yeah, and if you don't feel like starting a company, then just knock on my door, because we'll take you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They can start a company within the confines of Uke, and a lot of you shared research.
We have some like people that have left like being doctors and joined us, and they've been fantastic. So
amazing. I have a bunch of US doctor friends who are burnt out from COVID, so if any of them have ideas, I'll send them your way.
Yeah.
Awesome. So Tim, you've shared plans to expand Eucalyptus into the UK because of the similar regulatory environment, which you talked about earlier as well. What are there other expansions? You just mentioned mental health. Are there other expansions you'd consider, and what do you consider when you're thinking about potential brand or Eucalyptus expansion?
Yeah, I think there's like this question of like, what does a global healthcare company actually look like? I don't think we have like great examples of it out there. You can't look at like the software industry or like the Ubers of the world and go, yeah, that's what a global business in this space looks like. So I think that's a really fundamental question that we have to try and answer over the next 18 months to 5 years. And then on the vertical side, like the way that we would think about it is we build something new, which allows us to add an extra capability to the platform, which allows us to serve new conditions. And like the areas that I'm really excited about there are like, I'm really excited about the diagnostic space. I'm really excited about like the healthcare tracking space. And I'm really excited about the behavioral therapy space. So imagine we have something that combines those three at some point in the next 12 months as well.
Cool. Maybe the mental health one run by Nick, hypothetically.
Maybe, it could be that.
I wouldn't make the cut. I have a very high hiring bar.
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. So where do you each think the biggest opportunity in this sector lies?
Just in healthcare generally, I think like, look, it's all opportunity. I think we're on day one of healthcare innovation really, and I think like we've seen the mandate for digital health grow massively over the last couple of years, but we haven't really seen the solution space change that much. And so my advice would be, if you're thinking about starting a company in healthcare, just do it, because everything is opportunity at the moment. And even if your idea isn't fully formed yet, like there's so much need for so much innovation across so many areas that like it's hard to miss and hard to not find a good opportunity once you kind of start wading into the space.
Amazing. Anything you want to add there?
No, I think that captures it.
Okay. And how did COVID impact Eucalyptus? I'd love to hear a little more.
I mean, I don't know, honestly, because like we started just at the start of COVID, and like we grew quickly through COVID. How much of that was because of COVID, I don't really know. I think like it'd be nice to say it wasn't hugely impactful, but I think like obviously the way people are getting healthcare has changed fundamentally, and then that's had some impact. And I think the adoption from the industry and from government, and like the comfort with doing things digitally is the really exciting change, and hopefully that continues over the next couple of years and doesn't lose momentum.
Yeah. I'm a user of software skin and of kin fertility, and just to have it shipped to your door is amazing. And that's actually something we're pretty used to in the US, but seems relatively new. I mean, the whole e-commerce in general, the growth here. So
yeah, I mean, it's the presence of Amazon, right? We don't have Amazon as deeply embedded into our society as Americans do.
There's no one-day delivery here,
yeah,
and it breaks my heart.
Yeah.
I miss that. Okay, so let's turn over to some advice for some founders, specifically in the healthcare life sciences space. What are the metrics that VCs are looking for when you're pitching them a healthcare life sciences startup?
So I think like it massively depends on sector and stage. And so like we're talking about like drastically different businesses. And I think like the initial caution is to not get too caught up in it. My view is that at seed stage, it's like scale of the idea. So like, is the idea big enough? Is the team capable of executing on that idea? Like they're the two most important things. Is there a point of traction some point in the future, which suggests that like we're on the right path? So can you satisfy those three buckets? And then the later you go, the more metrics become important. But what those metrics are ties massively to the style of business you're trying to build. Because if you're building a software business where businesses pay you up front and then pay you continually forever, there's a lot lower revenue threshold than if you're a relatively high churn consumer business or a one-time transaction business. And so, mattresses is very different to pharmaceutical services, which is very different to medical imaging. And so I guess like there isn't one set, and don't try and shape your structures to a single set of metrics, because you're going to end up distorting what you actually do, and you're going to get like the really great things about your business lost in a financial model that doesn't make sense.
Amazing. So similar to a lot of other startups is basically the answer. Less about healthcare life sciences and basically like most startups.
Yeah, for sure.
Awesome.
Yeah, what Tim said is right, that the metrics at an early stage are just not going to be there. So we want to, in the Eucalyptus example, invest before the company exists. At that point, there are no metrics. I think the advice would be not to be metrics focused, to be, are you connected to the problem? Do you have a unique insight on how that problem might be solved? And do you have the capability in that early team to go and solve some small part of that in the next 12 to 18 months? That's the thing that will get you funded, not X number of patients doing Y thing.
In terms of what we mentioned earlier, market size and TAM, what are you looking for as a VC?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say something that you can grow a very large business into, so $100 million of revenue within 10 years, and not really touch the sides of the market size, where if you took $100 million of revenue out of the market, it wouldn't be a large part of that market. But in healthcare, almost every condition is that. And I learned things this year, like the size of the cost of autism, which I wasn't familiar with, is, I think that's the largest of the NDIS budget in Australia. That's the largest pool goes to autism now. That's not something I think people realize how big a problem that is unless you've been affected by it. So there's just all of these areas of healthcare that are like that. And so, you might think, oh, that's a small part of the population. Well, it may actually be a huge problem that needs solving.
And probably quite ripe for disruption, as you're seeing in all the different sectors that you guys are touching.
Yeah, I mean, yes.
Yeah.
So for the founders listening and potential founders, what is your best piece of advice for founders? And if it relates specifically to healthcare life sciences founders, great.
Best piece of advice, I think like think short term is actually like a really important piece of advice. Like there are swathes of advice that are like generalist and good. Like read all the things. It's not like there's not enough advice for startup founders on the internet. I guess like my one that I found to be true, which others potentially think other things on, is like that you actually need to limit your ambition to the relatively short term for most of the decisions you're going to make. like, I think like the phrase is like be default alive, and that means like have a point in the future which you know that you can get to where your business will be sustainable and you can survive on. And if you can't do that, then all of these promises of things down the road, there's just the risk that they don't come true and you never ever get the opportunity. So like be able to think short term and be able to like set the bar for what is like the next milestone that you need to hit is a really, really important thing. And I think people undervalue it.
Yeah, I'll go with pick your co-founders wisely and do that patiently and slowly and make sure you have the mix right and the level of trust right. I would say that the companies that I've seen that have succeeded at the highest level they had it in the co-founding mix, and that team has scaled to the problem set as it's grown. And I think people sometimes rush into that or feel they have to start the startup before they have the right mix of people, and especially in healthcare, I think that's the case. So it's the biggest decision you will ever make. It's the biggest risk that your business will carry for the first 3 years is a founder breakup. So focusing on the quality of that early team and the connection of that early team is the most important thing to get right.
Yeah, I agree. I completely rushed it, but got quite lucky.
Good, okay. You had a quick marriage, but got lucky. Perfect.
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. And do the same probably with your investors as well, which you guys are a great example of.
Yeah.
Really getting to know each other, not rushing that decision.
Yeah.
What's the future? What's next for Eucalyptus and or Blackbird? Last question.
I mean, the UK is our big thing at the moment. And then also we're really excited about like the lifestyle conditions that like we have a very transactional model at most of our conditions at the moment, but that's becoming a much more like longitudinal healthcare model. And we're really excited about like the more that we can interact with patients, the more that we can solve for them. And I think like that's the transition that's going on. And I couldn't be more excited about it.
Yeah, so we're in the process of raising what will be our largest ever fund. And our first fund is $29 million, and this fund should be way bigger than that. So that's a near-term thing. But as the fund gets bigger and as we get bigger, actually the internal stuff that we were talking about is go faster and go earlier. And so against that increase in size, we actually want to be more nimble, and we want to be taking earlier bets on founders and not letting size dictate the speed at which we move. So that's it sounds contradictory, but actually it's the only way we'll keep succeeding.
Okay, so if I'm a founder, early stage founder, I should come see you and the Blackbird team early and build a relationship. If I have an idea in healthcare life sciences, I'm going to come to you and see if it could fit within the Euc portfolio. That's what we're hearing?
That works.
Awesome. Okay, Tim and Nick, thank you guys so much. This was a really fun and informative panel, so I really appreciate the time from both of you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Entrepreneurs, you can check out the AWS Startup Law for resources to support your startup journey. If you want to start or continue your cloud journey, please use these training resources. And thank you again, Nick and Tim, for joining me, and everybody who tuned in. I hope you enjoyed hearing from them as much as I did. And viewers, we really value your feedback to help us improve our session, so please share your rating out of 5 stars. Thank you in advance. Thanks, guys.